T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Yo, Chris, this shit fun.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. Hope that you guys had a wonderful 4th of July Thursday. I know I did. I went out, watched some fireworks, and there were some fireworks taking place when it comes to Lamar Jackson and what he is in the postseason on social media. I saw this one dude for Fox. He's a former offensive lineman. He was going at Lamar Jackson, saying that he's tired of hearing the BS excuses about Lamar Jackson's poor play in the playoffs, and he just wants people to be honest about Lamar Jackson just not being a good playoff caliber quarterback. And then this is when the massive Lamar Jackson hater crowd started to show themselves again, because you guys know that we only hear from them every once in a while now because Lamar shuts them up every season. But they started to pile on and started pushing this narrative that Lamar Jackson is a playoff choker. Now, is Lamar a playoff choker? That's what we have to discuss on this episode. The New York Giants general managers, or their front office, they finally revealed the true reason why they didn't bring back Saquon Barkley. It was revealed on an episode of Hard Knocks. I didn't even know that they had an off-season version of this thing until I saw clips about it floating around on social media. And they had a shockingly confident reason why they believe they can still be successful without Saquon. We also got to discuss the chances of the Chargers winning the AFC West this year. Kansas City has won this division for 7 straight years in a row, but could their AFC West dominance end this year to the hands of Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert? Who will be better this season, Miami or FSU? The answer is going to surprise you guys. Is it championship or bust for Ohio State this year? I believe that it is, but will they be able to walk away hoisting up that national title trophy at the end of this season? And there's a sleeper team in the SEC this year that has sneaky potential that a lot of people are overlooking. Before we dive into this episode, if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Remember that we're not just a YouTube channel, we are a podcast. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones available in audio format wherever you get your podcasts from. Apple, Spotify, Amazon. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Follow us on Instagram at JT_Sports_ and on X at JT_Sports__. And shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Hope you guys are doing well. We got a really good show in store for you guys tonight. Okay. Lamar Jackson has done just about everything there is in the NFL. He's a 2-time MVP winner. He's led his team to the postseason. He also has led Baltimore to an AFC conference title game. And yet, despite everything that Lamar has accomplished, people are still looking for ways to keep him down and to not give him the credit that he deserves. And you know the argument that people always like to use against Lamar Jackson and his greatness. It's he's a playoff choker. He never shows up in the postseason. He's 2-4, has more playoff wins than Tua Tagovailoa, and he also has been further than what Josh Allen has in recent memory, but yet people want to keep pushing this agenda that Lamar Jackson will never be able to get over the hump because he just doesn't show up to play come playoff time, which isn't true. If you watch that AFC Championship game this past year against Kansas City, Lamar Jackson did not play bad in that game. If it wasn't for the Zay Flowers fumble and also the costly unsportsmanlike conduct penalty that he got, those two mistakes by Zay changed the outcome of that game in Kansas City's favor. You can't make it seem as if Lamar Jackson just played an awful game and say that he choked it away for Baltimore. If you're going to label a quarterback a choker, they have to play so bad that their team lost because of that bad performance. The Ravens haven't lost a single game all because Lamar just choked and he didn't play well. Every game that the Ravens have lost in the postseason has not been because of Lamar not being good enough to get it done. It's just been because of poor execution from the whole entire team. We can't blame the Ravens' shortcomings in the postseason on Lamar Jackson when he's the sole reason that John Harbaugh still has a job, and he also has the second best winning record behind Patrick Mahomes in the NFL. Lamar Jackson, every time he's healthy, the Ravens are in contention for the 1 seed in the AFC every year. I think that it's ridiculous to say that he'll never be able to get it done in the playoffs. And it's even further more ridiculous to say that he's a choker when he never really has choked. The whole entire team just didn't play well. Josh Allen, he hasn't been able to beat Patrick Mahomes. Is he a choker too? The key to beating Patrick Mahomes is that you have to show up the last 4 minutes of the game. Unfortunately, that's when Mahomes is at his best, and a lot of other quarterbacks like Lamar and Josh Allen, that's when they end up playing at their worst. But they're not playing bad enough where they're costing their team the game. It's just that there are certain plays that Patrick can make that Allen and LJ just simply can't make with the game on the line against the Chiefs. You have to be completely flawless when you go up against Kansas City come playoff time. There's only been one quarterback that's active right now that's been able to take down Mahomes in a postseason game, and that's been Joe Burrow. And that was thanks to how good that defense was that season that they went to the Super Bowl because they had an incredible second half performance against that Chiefs offense. Lamar is far from the reason why the Ravens keep coming up short in their aspirations to win the Super Bowl. If you take him off that franchise, John Harbaugh wouldn't be there, and there's a lot of guys who probably wouldn't be there neither. He's carrying the Ravens franchise on his back. Yes, they do have a good defense. He has had weapons in the past, but Lamar Jackson is the soul that is making that engine go up there. I'm not about to blame the Ravens' shortcomings on the guy that's a 2-time MVP, and every time he's healthy, the Ravens normally have the 1 seed. Peyton Manning struggled in the postseason sometimes. Yeah, Lamar hasn't always played his best ball in the playoffs, but everybody has bad games. Only a handful of quarterbacks are able to win in the postseason. Lamar Jackson is still at a point in his career where I think it's too young to call him a choker. Dak Prescott, we've seen enough out of this dude to know what he is come playoff time. But we've seen Lamar take his team to an AFC championship. You can't say he's a choker when he's been further than what a lot of these quarterbacks have been throughout the majority of their career. And if you were to put Lamar on a better team like Dallas, they would have already had a Super Bowl. The situation around Lamar in big games kind of unravels in big moments. And Lamar Jackson can't make up for the lack of good coaching or Todd Monken forgetting to hand the football off to his running backs, despite his squad leading the National Football League in rushing yards per game. You know, I'm not saying that Lamar should be excused from any accountability in the Ravens' playoff shortcomings, but he's far from being bad enough to be considered a choke artist. And I think that eventually we're going to see Lamar Jackson break through and win the Super Bowl for the Baltimore Ravens, man. He just went to his first conference championship game. There's no reason to think that he can't make it back. He still has about 4 or 5 more years of his prime, and outside of Mahomes, there hasn't been a single quarterback that's been able to be as successful when it comes to impacting their franchise ability to win games than Lamar Jackson, and that's shown by his win-loss record. The better the quarterback, the more they can overcome. Lamar Jackson, he hasn't had an elite group of wide receivers. You know, last year was pretty much the best supporting cast that he's ever had during their time in Baltimore. Hell, they had to change their philosophy to appease Lamar and to accommodate him and give him the necessary pieces that they needed to be able to even go as far as what they did last year. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to my guy M Sparks. He says, "Sup JT, Pittsburgh Steelers for life." My dude K Roan, shout out to you for the $9.99 donation. He says, "Powerful JT Sports, appreciate your content and takes. We need more people like you speaking the truth." Shout out to you. I appreciate you for the $10 donation, my guy. He also says, "Lamar knew exactly what he was doing, holding out on his contract so right. Is all that working out and right in Baltimore?" Yeah, man. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. We got a lot more to dive into. Before we continue, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Remember that you can find the audio version of tonight's episode on all podcasting platforms, on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. Listen to the pod and give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. The Kansas City Chiefs have dominated the AFC West division for 7 straight years. They've taken home the division crown, but could that end this season? The Chargers have a new head coach in Jim Harbaugh that has shown the ability in the past that he's not one of those coaches that he needs 2 to 3 years to be able to put together a contender. He's good enough that he can build a contender right away, immediately. And for a very long time, this division hasn't had good coaches. Well, Jim Harbaugh is a good enough coach where you look at him inheriting Justin Herbert. And the Chargers are going to have a really good offensive line this year. And their defense can be really good too. They have a good enough squad where they could take the league by surprise and win the AFC West this year. The AFC West is not that good. There are only 2 teams in this division that are good enough to even be playoff caliber, and that's Kansas City and the Chargers themselves. Kansas City is not as good as what people think they are, even though they walk into this season having the opportunity to cement themselves as a dynasty and three-peat. Their offensive line still isn't good. Hell, the Chargers' offensive line is way better than what Kansas City's is going into this year. Their defense is always really good because of Steve Spagnuolo, but the Chargers have a really good defensive coordinator going into this year and Jesse Minter. And the defense that we've seen from LA in the last couple of years that's been an abomination, you're no longer going to see this year with how well coached Jesse Minter is going to have that unit. There are going to be a lot of issues that caused the Chargers to underachieve in years prior that you're no longer going to see because of coaching. You're not going to see blown coverages, missed assignments. You're going to see a team that's going to be ready to play. They're going to be well prepared, and they're also going to be physical and tough in the trenches. The knock on Los Angeles being able to be a playoff team or maybe not be able to push for the AFC West crown is due to the lack of talent that they have on paper. But one thing about Jim Harbaugh is that, as he has shown this past season at Michigan, you don't need to have a talented team to win as long as you have him as your head coach, because he's going to instill an identity in you that's going to equate to you being a championship team. That's toughness, being physical up front, and being able to go a full fourth quarter or a full 4 quarters of football. The Chargers are going to be able to handle themselves up front against Kansas City this year, and that possibly could be what gives them the advantage. They're also going to have a really good rushing attack, and their receiving core is going to be decent enough to win as long as they can keep Justin Herbert upright. You don't need elite wide receivers to be able to win. When did Jim Harbaugh ever had the elite number one when he was coaching for the 49ers? Never. His best options were Vernon Davis and Michael Crabtree. None of those dudes were all that great. The same thing with the Chargers this season. It's the same problem that, people kind of have given the benefit of a doubt to Kansas City because they've been able to win despite not having great talent, but because they have a good coaching staff. You got a great quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, and you got a good head coach in Andy Reid. The Chargers kind of have that similar situation. Jim Harbaugh isn't as good as Andy Reid, but he's not too far away from him. He's a top 5, top 7 coach right now based off what he did his first few seasons with the San Francisco 49ers. The Chargers also have an elite quarterback in Justin Herbert. He's not as good as Patrick Mahomes, but he's a top 7 QB in the league. They got a good offensive line. They're going to have a good defense, and they're going to be able to use that smash mouth mentality to bulldoze their way and to bully ball themselves to an AFC West championship this year, potentially capturing this division. We know that it goes through Kansas City, and they have the kind of team that can beat Kansas City this year inside this division. Kansas City has a good chance to three-peat this year, but I don't think it's going to be as easy as what we may think. The Chargers are a way different team than what we've seen in years past, all because of who they've hired to be their head coach. This is probably the best head coach the Chargers have ever had in the history of their franchise. I believe the Chargers have a great chance to win this division this year, and I can't see them winning anything less than 9 games. At best, this is an 11, potentially 12-win team. There are certain things that you may look at on paper when it comes to evaluating how good a team is that you won't see on paper until the games are played because of the impact of coaching. Coaching is something that many of you guys do not take into account when it comes to predicting how good a team is going to be. You judge a team based on how you infer their roster to produce this year and maybe who their quarterback is, or depending on how big name the head coach is, right? But when you look at the Chargers, their head coach has won in the National Football League at a very high level right away. And he has also shown the ability to elevate teams that may not be the most talented, but they play to the mentality that he implements, being physical and punishing you up front. And this year, I think that the Chargers have the squad to be able to stop Kansas City from dominating the AFC West still. I think that I wouldn't be surprised personally if we saw the Chargers win the AFC West instead of Kansas City. My guy, Kevin78 says, is Greg or Jim running the offense? They got Greg Roman calling the plays. My guy, Kate Roan says, and yet Kansas City still pulls the win out in the last few minutes. It's like watching Tom Brady crazy. And Spark says, yep, don't think San Diego, oops, LA is ready yet. For all you guys that didn't know this, they got an off-season Hard Knocks that has just released their first episode a few days ago, showcasing the New York Giants and their front office and what they've done this offseason. And we all knew that there was a high chance that Saquon Barkley was not going to remain a Giant. But nobody expected him to just walk on into the hands of the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Giants had a chance to keep Saquon Barkley, but they didn't choose to. And a lot of us were asking why. Well, General Manager Joe Schoen and the first episode of Hard Knocks finally revealed the true reason why the Giants decided to say, you know what, Saquon, we're good without you. We don't need you. And that's because they said that they didn't pay Daniel Jones $40 million a year to hand the ball off to a $12 million a year running back. That just is absurd to me, because if you're giving Daniel Jones $40 million a year, would you not like him to have a really good option in the backfield like a Saquon Barkley? $12 million a year may seem a little expensive for a running back, but Saquon Barkley, when he's healthy, he's the second best running back in the league behind Christian McCaffrey. And that year that the Giants went to the playoffs and they made it to the divisional round, it wasn't because of Daniel Jones being good. It was mostly because that he played well within the structure of Brian Dable's offense. And at least you had Saquon Barkley, who was mainly the focal point of that offense. If you take Saquon Barkley off that Giants team that went to the playoffs a few years back, they would have not have had a winning record. You see, yes, the running back position is going out of style. It doesn't matter as much now to being a championship team as it used to do back in the 90s when the Cowboys were winning with Emmitt Smith and you had Terrell Davis going off with the Denver Broncos. But if you are a team that's already in position to win, like the 49ers or the Eagles, having a Saquon Barkley is nothing but an asset to you. And it makes you an even more scarier team than what you would be without him. The New York Giants, they still don't have a lot of proven playmakers on offense. This offense would have been better if they would have kept Saquon and continued to go the direction that they did in improving the offensive line. The dudes that they brought in, I don't think were worth allowing Saquon Barkley to walk out the door. Yeah, they made about 2 decent signings, but the offensive line overall still isn't good. You're still going to potentially be out there starting Evan Neal, who has more than shown us enough to tell us that he doesn't have what it takes to be a good offensive tackle in this league, yet you're still going to put him out there. And with you making these spicy remarks about Daniel Jones, you know, you didn't pay him $40 million a year to hand it on to a $12 million a year running back. So you're telling us, Joe Schoen, that Danny Pennies is good enough to elevate the Giants without an elite rushing attack? Devin Singletary and Eric Gray are not going to give you the production that Saquon gave you on the ground. The key to winning in the NFL is that you need weapons around your quarterback. Daniel Jones is only as good as the pieces you have around him, and your offensive line slightly improved, it still might not be that good, and you just downgraded that running back. With how Joe Schoen and the dudes he was meeting with when they were discussing Saquon Barkley's future would have made you feel as if you could have been a general manager. Because the way they were talking, it's the same way me and you would be talking if we were discussing fantasy football. Should I keep this player? Should I cut him? Why do you think I should start him? That's exactly how those discussions sounded. And there weren't too many in this room who disagree with Joe Schoen's terrible thinking. You need Daniel Jones that have a good situation that help you keep a job. I wouldn't be betting my job security on Daniel Jones having a good season. I would rather keep Saquon Barkley, get better at improving the offensive line via the draft than to try to get some middle or barely above average guys in free agency. They signed a really good offensive guard from Green Bay, but outside of that, all these signings are hit or miss. And based off what we've seen in the previous free agency cycles out of the Giants, they don't really hit on a lot of their free agency signings. I don't think that Joe Schoen did himself any favors by allowing the cameras to follow him into his office and to allow this discussion of Saquon's future to take place, because this just sounds really sad and idiotic. Because you mean to tell me you really believe that Daniel Jones is good enough where he can win despite not having a great rushing attack? And speaking of Daniel Jones, with Joe Schoen saying that they didn't pay Daniel Jones $40 million a year to hand the ball off to a $12 million running back, that statement shows that the Giants have all the confidence in the world that Daniel Jones is going to deliver this season on the contract extension that they gave him. And listen, if you believe Daniel Jones is the guy, go ahead, but I don't think it would have been a smart decision in Joe Schoen's shoes to be betting my job security on Daniel Jones. Haven't we not seen what this dude is in the last couple of seasons? Last year, he wasn't that good. Even the year that he led them to the postseason, he wasn't that good. He was just good enough, and he played well within the structure of Brian Daboll's offense. But he hasn't thrown more than 20 touchdowns in a year since his rookie season. He's been through a couple of gruesome injuries as well. At this point, you're getting a quarterback that, at his best, is a top 14 quarterback. And that's not going to get you too far in the postseason. The New York Giants, what they're banking on is that they had a good enough offseason. They've improved the offensive line enough, getting Malik Neighbors. You're going to have Jalen Hyatt going into year 2, that you've given Daniel Jones enough that he can have a good amount of success for you. He can be efficient because you've given him what you believe to be a better supporting cast, but you let Saquon Barkley walk out the door to your arch rival right down the street for $12 million. Daniel Jones, that year that he led them to that playoff win against the Minnesota Vikings, partially why they got to that point wasn't because of how good Daniel Jones was. It was because of having Saquon Barkley in the backfield behind him. If you take him off that year's team, Daniel Jones would have had no weapons on that offense at all. Having an elite running back definitely helps out a dude like Daniel Jones, who his athleticism does play a pretty large chunk in the New York Giants offense, at least their rushing attack. And now you don't have any threats at the running back position. Now you're going to be leaning on Daniel Jones even more. Based off these statements that we've heard from the Giants general manager, he makes it seem like Daniel Jones can go out there and have him an MVP season damn near, at least to me. We didn't pay him $40 million a year to hand the ball off to a $12 million a year running back? Since when was that a bad thing? Since when was having good talent a bad thing at running back? Yes, elite running backs are expensive, but there's a reason why they are called elite backs, because having these kinds of backs can elevate your offense, especially if you have a good offensive line. You want to take this money and invest it to giving Daniel Jones a better supporting cast when it's nothing better than what you've had in years prior. And you haven't done a good job of giving Daniel Jones weapons in free agency. You signed Paris Campbell. You traded for Darren Waller. How many free agency moves have the Giants made offensively that have actually worked out? I can't think of too many. You can't draft well neither. Evan Neal is a bust. Thank God you got Andrew Thomas. But some of the free agency moves that you made, I don't see them working out just based off how bad you've been and evaluating talent in free agency in the past. And Daniel Jones' situation still doesn't look all that better from what he's been walking into in years prior. The Giants still have one of the worst rosters in the league. If this is a proven year for Daniel Jones, you might as well just say this is a throwaway year if you're a New York Giants fan watching the product that you're about to see on the screen this year. Because they're not going to be good. From what we've heard Joe Schoen talking about when it comes to Daniel Jones and the confidence that they have in him, you would think that they're tanking for Shedeur. That's what it seems like, because you ain't going far with Daniel Jones at quarterback. He was a former first-round pick. These guys are supposed to be able to overcome certain limitations, and I don't see it with Danny Pennies at quarterback. Miami has the potential to win the ACC this year and to get a spot in the college football playoffs as long as you don't have any games where the bad coaching ends up becoming a problem that we've seen in years past out of Mario Cristobal. But as a lifelong Hurricanes fan, I've never had more confidence in the team, the coaching staff, the quarterback play than going into this season. All right, I believe that Mario Cristobal is good enough to get Miami to that ACC championship game, especially if you have to go through Florida State to get it done, because FSU is not going to be good this year. Miami, from a talent standpoint, is way more superior than what the Seminoles are walking into this season. DJ Uiagalelei is a downgrade at quarterback from what you had in Jordan Travis. He's inconsistent. He never played that good in big games for Oregon State, and there weren't too many games that you could watch of him for the Beavers when he completed at least 60% or higher of his passes in games against top 25 teams. And it was the same story when he was playing for Dabo Swinney at Clemson. Having DJU at QB makes you a team that potentially could end up disappointing and not making it to the playoffs this year, because you're at least going to lose 2 or 3 close games because you don't have a quarterback who's been able to prove that he can play good football in the fourth quarter and make good decisions. And you also don't have a good wide receiving core. Meanwhile, for Miami, you have Cam Ward, who is arguably one of the best, if not the best, quarterback in college football going into this season. You got the second best running back out of the portal and Damian Martinez. You're stacked at wide receiver. You're going to have a really good offensive line. Miami offensively is more talented than Florida State. And the defenses, I think, are about evenly matched. Miami's just as good as what FSU is up front. And their secondaries, okay, I'll give it to Florida State. But Miami's corners and safeties are being severely slept on going into this year due to how well Mario Cristobal has done in high school recruiting. Florida State hasn't recruited at the level that Miami has the last couple of seasons. Miami has brought in a top 10 and top 5 class the last 2 years under Mario. I get that Mario has had his fair share of shortcomings, and he's had some really ugly moments like we saw in that meltdown against Georgia Tech. But let's not act as if everything was all easy daisies for Coach Norvell at Florida State. Because if my memory serves me correctly, before last season, there were a good amount of you Seminole fans, and y'all know who y'all are, who wanted Mike Norvell gone, or you were questioning if he was the right guy for this program. Mario Cristobal has recruited well. Miami has improved every single season under him. There's going to be some bumps in the road when you're trying to build up a contender and the team that struggled to recruit in the most talent-rich area in all of America, and the team that has consistently been let down by poor coaching in years past. You now have the opportunity with Mario Cristobal, somebody who's proven to win at a high level in the Power 5 conference at the time at Oregon. He won a Pac-12 championship. He got numerous guys drafted in the first round: Justin Herbert, Penei Sewell, Kayvon Thibodeau for the New York Giants. He's really good at developing talent. It's just that sometimes he has moments where the game just slips from within his fingers. But let's not act like Mike Norvell didn't have those similar moments when he was coaching earlier the last previous years before 2023 at Florida State. Miami's going to be a better team than FSU this year, mainly because they got better quarterback play. They're also going to be better up front than the Seminoles. And this is just going to be a more consistent football team. You can talk about the coaching all you want to, but Mike Norvell, he had some time management issues, and there were some concerns about how good he was and if he could be trustworthy last offseason. So I don't want to hear this nonsense about Miami doesn't have a chance because who their coach is. When we said this same thing about Florida State last year, you can call me biased all you want to, but I was honest last season when I said Florida State was going to go undefeated, win the ACC, and make the playoffs. So now I'm just all of a sudden being biased because I feel it's Miami's time. Florida State doesn't recruit at the level where they simply can rebuild. It's going to take a few years of them continuing to get some key pieces through the portal and recruiting to get back to the level that they were last season, because last season's team was constructed not overnight. It was constructed over the first couple of years that Norvell was there. There were some guys early that he got from the portal that he developed, like Johnny Wilson and Jordan Travis. And then last season, he went in and got some immediate impact guys that only had 1 year left of eligibility, i.e. Keon Coleman. 2023 FSU wasn't built in one day. It was a process. And with Mario Cristobal at Miami, it's a process. And now we're about to see the root of all of Mario Cristobal's hard work when Miami ends up going 11-1 this year, winning the ACC, and smacking Florida State's ass in the process. Florida State is very overrated this year. They don't have a lot of proven production at wide receiver. You're going to have really inconsistent and shaky quarterback play from DJU. You're going to have a good defense. Your run game is going to be good, but nobody's going to take you seriously when you got DJ Uiagalelei throwing the football to win you games in the fourth quarter. Miami has way more to be confident in compared to Florida State, man. I'm so tired of people gassing up the Seminoles due to the recency bias, but that's a discussion I'm going to save for another episode. Now, I've been rambling for a while on that, but there's another team that I want to ramble about, but they're a little bit more up north in Big Ten country. Can Ohio State live up to expectations this year? Their starting quarterback, Will Howard, said that we know it's championship or bust this season. Are the Buckeyes finally going to be able to hoist up that gold college football playoff trophy in Ryan Day's hands? Because you feel as if it's now or never for them. The talent's there. This is pretty much one of the greatest teams that they've ever had in the history of their program. You're loaded on defense. You got the best player out of the portal and Caleb Downs in the secondary. He's going to be a monster. You got a very deep and talented defensive line. Same thing with offense. You're loaded at wide receiver. You got nothing but top 100 recruits and better in your wide receiver room. Will Rogers, is he good enough to get it done? Well, not Will Rogers, but Will Howard. Okay, is he the flashy quarterback that you would expect to see winning titles at Ohio State? No, but he's better than what you had last year and Honda McCord. And with Will Howard, you also have somebody that has a little bit more juice athletically and on the ground than what Kyle McCord gave you. And he's a better, more consistent passer than what McCord was. And with the weapons that he's going to be throwing to this season, plus you got Chip Kelly dialing up the plays, this could be, if not one of, the best offense in college football this season. I mean, there's no way this offense should be stopped this season. You have the best running back duo in college football. Trayvon Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. I mean, how can you beat Ohio State this year? They have no weakness. You can keep talking about the offensive line, but their offensive line has played down to their level of expectations the last 2 seasons. You really think that's going to continue at a school like Ohio State that recruits at the rate that they do and brings in the kind of classes that they continue to bring in every year under Ryan Day? My confidence level in Ohio State being able to win it all is at an all-time high with Ryan Day being at the helm. We give this dude way too much flack for a guy who has less than 10 wins on his resume. There's only a handful of coaches that can say that their worst season is losing 2 games. And every time Ohio State has been to the playoffs, they've normally fared pretty well, outside of getting outclassed by Alabama. We seem to have forgotten that the last time they were in the semifinals, they came a missed field goal shy of beating Georgia, which had an all-time great team that season. Ohio State, going into the 2024 college football season, this is their moment to finally take care of something that they should have done a long time ago, and that's actually being able to legitimize Ryan Day as an elite coach in this sport by getting him a national title. There has never been a better chance for him to silence his doubters than this season. With the talent he has, the breaks that he's going to be getting in the schedule, you're playing Michigan at home. You only have to beat Penn State and Oregon outside of Michigan. Those are winnable games. And Penn State, you own James Franklin. So if I had to make my early national championship pick, I would rock with Ohio State. This is the year that Ohio State can finally get theirs. They saw their rivals in Michigan get it done and Ann Arbor, but that was mainly because of how great of a coach Jim Harbaugh was. Ryan Day, I think that he's one of the best coaches in the sport right now. And eventually his efforts on the recruiting trail and with the coaching staff that he's assembled for this season is all going to pair and work out for Ohio State and lead to them winning a national title this year. I feel really good about the Buckeyes' chances to win it all this season. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we get up on out of here is this. I want to tell you guys about a really sneaky sleeper team in the SEC that nobody is talking about this year. Kentucky has the potential to be one of those teams that, like Missouri last year, nobody expected them to be any more than a 6-7 win team at best. And then late come around November, you potentially are looking at them as a surprising entrance into the 12-team college football playoffs. Kentucky this season, how far they go is going to be determined by how well their transfer quarterback Brock Vandagriff plays. Now, Brock Vandagriff, this dude was a backup for Georgia the past couple of seasons, but he ain't no slouch. He was really talented. He was the 5th best quarterback coming out of the 2021 recruiting cycle. That was up there with Quinn Ewers, Caleb Williams. You also have somebody who was the 5th best quarterback coming out of this past year's transfer portal cycle. And the thing that has held back Kentucky is that they haven't had a quarterback that's been consistent at throwing the football through the air. Last year, you thought you were going to get efficient QB play out of Devin Leary, but he was a major disappointment. With how good Kentucky's going to be up front, they're going to have a good offensive line. They're going to have a good defensive line. Plus, you got really good wide receivers, Dane Key, Barrion Brown. That's one of the better wide receiving cores in the SEC walking into this season. But nobody talks about how good they are because they haven't had the ability to showcase their abilities with the good quarterback. Well, you're getting that this season, potentially in Brock Vandagriff, and he ends up playing up to his full potential. And what is Brock Vandagriff's full potential? Well, it's really scary, but he has the ceiling of a potential Heisman finalist. Could he win the Heisman? I don't think so, but he can definitely put up good enough numbers at UK where he could find himself in the conversation. This is the most hype that I've ever had for a University of Kentucky quarterback walking into any season, just because of the raw talent that he has, from his arm strength to him having a good amount of athleticism. But if he ends up panning out, you mean to tell me that Kentucky can't be a 9-win team? They always say that if you want to be able to compete in the SEC, you gotta have the athletes up front. Kentucky has that. This is the most talented offensive line that they've had in recent memory, and their defensive line has some of the more highly recruited guys that they've had in program history. Your secondary has a lot of athleticism in the back end as well, even though you're replacing a lot of experience there. Kentucky, even though their schedule is really tough, I could see them going on the road and maybe pulling off an upset against Tennessee or Texas, just because of the talent level that they have around Brock Vandagriff. They got receivers. They're good up front. All you need is for Brock Vandagriff to play up to his potential, which I definitely think is possible. He looked really impressive in the spring game. He has a good supporting cast. Your new offensive coordinator, who comes from Boise State, should run an offense that should produce more out of the passing game for what you got out of your previous OC and Liam Cohen. Look out for Kentucky this year. They have scary potential. If Brock Vandagriff ends up going off this year, they could easily be a 9-win team or better, because their defense is going to be really good and they're going to have an offense that can score some points. Mark Stoops is one of the more underappreciated coaches in America, and he doesn't have the same access to resources that you would see out of a elite tier program. So the transfer portal has been a great benefit to Kentucky. And if they can get Brock Vandagriff right, because they've had the tendency of finding their QB1s from the portal. Will Levis was a pretty good hit. Devin Leary was a miss. But if Brock Vandagriff can end up being a giant home run for them, their upside is incredibly scary. And 9 wins, maybe 10, you could see them playing in the SEC championship, or at worst, maybe they have a bid into the college football playoffs as a 12th or 11th seed. Kentucky's a very scary team if Brock Vandagriff ends up living up to his level of expectations that he had coming out of high school and out of the portal. This is it for this episode of JT Sports Live. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to my guy Kevin78. Shout out to my guy Kate Roan. Shout out to my guy M Sparks.